Loud and clear. Okay, I think we're ready. All right.
Yeah, we're good to go on my end. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mom. Okay, good morning, commissioners. Thank you for your time today. My name is Mitch Horry. I'm Focus on Energy Performance Manager, and this presentation is going to cover results from 2 studies performed for Focus on Energy ahead of planning for the next quad of the program. Next slide, please, Steve. So on slide 2, we're looking at the agenda today for the presentation. I'm just going to kick things off here at the onset, but the bulk of the presentation is going to be handled by the staff over at Cadmus who conducted the study. We'll go through a quick overview of the purpose of the study and how it fits into quad planning. We'll take about 20 minutes on the energy efficiency potential study results, and then move into a presentation of the rooftop solar PV potential study. So 30 minutes total for presentation is what we've got planned. And then we'll leave 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. Next slide, please. So as I said, I'll provide a quick overview. We are on slide number 4. Really, these 2 studies, like I mentioned before, are conducted ahead of planning for the next quad of focus. Their purpose is really to inform planning for the quadratic planning process, to make sure that the goals and targets that we set for the program are appropriate and within reason. They are stakeholder-driven processes. This held a series of stakeholder meetings for both the energy efficiency study and solar PV study. And in fact, the solar PV study was born out of that stakeholder process for the EE study. That was a recommendation from the stakeholders that eventually made its way as a proposal to the commission that was approved back in February. And both of these studies have a statewide scope. They look at potential for energy efficiency and rooftop solar at the state level. They both take 12-year planning horizons, so they look out 12 years into the future, beginning with that first year of Quad 4, which would be 2023. Both of these studies use scenario modeling, so we don't know exactly what the future is going to look like for energy efficiency or rooftop solar. So in order to be more informed, we wanted to look at what happens under different types of policy conditions. So that includes a range of things both within and outside of the scope of the commission's decisions. Important thing to note here is these studies are not a prescription or a roadmap for what focus should be for the next 4 years. They're foundational information that really should be kind of considered as a starting point for planning for the next quad, to help us be informed about how those decisions are made, what kind of outcomes we could expect under different types of policy conditions. So just important to keep that in mind. They inform the planning process that's really going to kick off here pretty soon in the fall, where we want to get feedback from stakeholders about the issues they want to see focus address, and that goes to the commission, who ultimately sets the trajectory for the next quad of focus with certain policy decisions. So that's my spiel. I'm going to send it over to Steve Kofer. He's a principal at Cadmus, and he's going to walk through the energy efficiency potential study. Steve, you can take it away.
Great. Thanks for allowing us to present our findings. Can you see my video? Just checking to see if that's working. I thought it might be nice to put a face to the voice.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we wanted to first make sure that we're talking the same language around what potential we looked at for this study. So starting at the top, we looked at technical potential, and that's the theoretical maximum potential that could be achieved through energy efficiency. It doesn't constrain anything around such as costs, market barriers. If it's able to be converted to energy efficiency, it's converted regardless of any barriers. And then a subset of the technical is the economic, and the economic screens for cost effectiveness. And so we look for measures that are cost effective, and that's what comes out of that screening. We use the modified total resource cost test, which is the approved cost test for focus. A subset of the economic is optimized, and optimized is all cost-effective efficiency measures, and we don't constrain for funding or other barriers. It's not constrained by different funding levels around the fuel or sector. And then finally, the last set of potential we looked at was around current policy, and this potential, we do look at constraining for focus policy decisions around budget, funding constraints around fuels, around sector, and making sure that things are equitable across the program. This study does not look at potential at the program level. So it's really at the portfolio level. The next couple slides, we're going to provide a high-level overview of the findings around the electric and the natural gas potential. So starting in the upper left-hand corner, we're showing the different levels of potential from technical down to current policy. And then we're also showing the energy efficiency potential as a percent of sales. And as you'd expect, technical potential achieves much more than when things are constrained down at the current policy level. Looking back at the 2017 study, which was the last potential study that was conducted for Focus on Energy, these levels are pretty consistent with that last study. Going over to the top right graphic, we're looking at the percent of optimized potential across sectors. And as you can see, the industrial, residential are showing the highest levels of opportunity. Again, this is fairly consistent with what we saw for the 2017 potential study. And then the bottom graph is, I'm sorry, did somebody have a question?
Actually, I have a question. Do I have to have this on? I didn't know. I don't need that. Do I need this on, Mon, to ask? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Did you guys look at, so I guess the upper right quadrant here, it was for the optimized potential. Did you do an analysis for the current policy, since that's more of the reality of where we're at with using the budget constraints of what the potential is for the different sectors?
Yes, that is in the report. We do have sector potential we have energy efficiency potential at the sector levels.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And I guess that's a good point. Throughout this presentation, we tried to, when we're looking at things that are compared to the last study, try to make it apples to apples. And there really is no current policy potential in the 2017 study. So the most comparable potential between the two studies is really the economic and somewhat the optimized as well. The bottom graph is showing energy efficiency potential as a percent of sales. And it's also it's percent of sales, and it's annualized. And the bottom bar graph, the dark blue graph, is showing the 2019 historical program savings. And so we wanted to compare and look at what how the program operated in 2019 compared to what the model is projecting. And as you can see, the annualized savings for the current policy is somewhat similar to the 2019 program. It should be noted also that we're not looking at we're looking at gross savings throughout the potential study. So the potential study did not account for any program attribution, such as free ridership, market effects, spillover, that would need to be considered in the quad planning.
Steve, I think there's a question from Commissioner Huebner.
Okay. Hear me? I can barely hear you.
Yeah, let me move the mic. Sure.
The blue box in the upper left of this page,
Yes.
is that assuming consistent levels of energy efficiency between, 2021 and 2034, so 14 years of it, or is that assuming just this quad, 4 years of energy efficiency?
It's the 12-year potential, 12-year cumulative potential.
Got it. So consistent programming for 12 years would estimate that if we didn't have the funding, we'd be using 27% more or something like that, or I guess 13% more electricity under current policy. If we didn't have focus on energy, our electric sales 12 years from now would be 13% higher than they would be with focus on energy. Is that what that's saying?
Yes. Yeah. That's a good way to interpret it. And I'm sorry. So, Mitch, maybe if there are questions or things, I can't see any hand raises or anything. So if you speak up, happy to address those.
Sure, I'll try.
On the natural gas side, similar set of information that we're presenting here. The natural gas, and we'll talk a little bit about this in subsequent slides, is more sensitive to the lower avoided costs. So between the two studies, the 2017 and the 2021, we saw we used lower avoided costs. I think you guys are familiar with the lower avoided costs used in this quad. And looking at the technical economic optimized potential here compared to 2017, these are lower numbers, lower percentages than what we saw in 2017. On the natural gas side, for at the sector level, residential is showing the largest set of opportunity. Commercial is slightly down. Again, that's largely due to lower avoided costs, and the commercial measures were a bit more sensitive to those avoided costs in this study. Again, saw a similar trend when we look at the annualized potential as a percent of sales, and the 2019 program savings are, in line with what our current policy model is showing. The next set of slides, we are looking at electric and gas measures and where the most cost-effective measures, what measures are showing up. And so what we're showing here is various measures at the sector level: residential, commercial, industrial, and ag, and then the percent of savings that these measures make up, economic percentages for each sector. A couple notable things on the electric side. You see that LED lighting is consistently showing up between the sectors. We are seeing that LED lighting still has some significant potential energy efficiency opportunity. However, that's going to be diminishing over the 12-year period. So what we found was that there was more short-term LED opportunity and it kind of diminishes over the course of this study. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is in the coming slide. These also include measures that are widget based, but controlled with optimizing the widget. So for instance, Wi-Fi thermostats with seasonal savings. What that is it's a optimization algorithm that is optimizing your thermostat. So participants can sign up and your Nest or Ecobee thermostat can optimize how your HVAC unit is running. We also saw on the industrial side some large energy efficiency potential on the process improvements. That was a significant share of the energy savings on the industrial side. Natural gas measures, seeing kind of a similar trend with some of the measures, such as the process improvements, the Wi-Fi thermostats with seasonal savings. Some kind of newer measures pop up with the natural gas, such as like energy feedback. So that would be like a behavioral type program where homeowners are receiving energy savings reports, or their devices are giving them notifications to make energy efficiency changes or changes that can create some energy efficiency within their home. These are measures that are just passing the cost effectiveness screening. So they're not factoring in other market barriers that the program would need to address to have commercial buildings, residential buildings start to adopt them. So it doesn't account for that. Just want to, it's kind of an important note. Just want to make that, put that out there. So I mentioned residential lighting had a pretty big hit, and we saw about a 50% decrease in savings in the residential sector for LED lighting compared to the 2017 study. There are a few drivers behind that. One is federal policies. At the federal level, there's policies in play that would make LED technology pretty much the standard technology across the board. The market has matured rapidly. LED products are pretty high quality now. They work very well. The price dropped significantly over a short time period, making them comparable cost-wise to lower efficient technologies such as halogens. And then the program has been pretty successful in implementing LEDs. And as the program is successful, that just limits the opportunity in the future for installing LEDs. And this isn't something that Wisconsin is dealing with by itself. Every state utility is looking at decreased savings potential for LEDs in the residential market. And there are some emerging technologies that the study found that could be promising. So, for instance, electric water heaters, heat pump water heaters, for instance, were not cost effective in the 2017 study, but are cost effective in 2021. So that might be an opportunity. High efficiency central air conditioners may be another opportunity. Those particular measures alone aren't going to start to close the gap. There will need to be some new program designs or maybe an emphasis on programs that could scale up to start to close that gap that the LEDs were providing historically for the Focus program. There was a slight decrease in the LED lighting for commercial buildings and industrial, but that wasn't really a material impact from it, but it was slightly lower. I mentioned avoided costs are at play here for the potential that we're seeing in this particular study. And so what we're showing here is the electric and natural gas. Excuse me. And the top bar is the 2017 study, and the bottom bar is 2021. The green bar represents measures that are cost effective. The yellow bar are measures that are not quite cost effective, but close. And then the red bars are measures that are not cost effective. And as you can see, between the two studies, there just are not as many measures that are passing the cost effectiveness test. And that's largely due to the lower avoided costs. The lower avoided costs as I think you know, is one of the larger benefits in the cost effectiveness test. So it does have a material impact on the overall cost effectiveness of measures passing. We also ran several different scenarios to see how they would be, how it impacted the overall energy efficiency potential. Several of these scenarios are decision points that the commissioners have the ability to weigh in on during quad planning, such as the type of test that is being used, the discount rate, the cost of carbon. So the first scenario that we ran through was just lowering the threshold of cost effectiveness at the measure level. And as you would expect, as you start to lower that, more measures are becoming more cost effective. We also looked at the impact of the cost effectiveness tests. The primary test used for focus is the modified total resource cost test. But if you were to use a different cost test, you would have different outcomes and slightly more energy efficiency potential. Discount rate is a input into those cost effectiveness tests. Right now, the focus program uses a 2% discount rate. And so as you change that up or down, you're impacting the savings. So if you increase the discount rate, you're lowering the efficiency potential. And if you lower that, you're increasing it. And then finally, we looked at different levels of valuing reduction in carbon. Right now, the program uses $15 per ton. In this scenario, we used a much higher dollar value that was based on some research that we did around the social cost of carbon and what that would look like for Wisconsin. And then also including the transmission and distribution deferrals would add additional benefit and provide additional opportunity for measures to be passing the cost test. On the gas side, we see a similar kind of distribution here. I'm just going to kind of, in the interest of time, go through this pretty quickly. But I think one thing to note is that the natural gas measures were a little bit more sensitive and responsive to these scenarios than the electric side. The last scenario that we looked at was increasing the funding levels. So we looked at two different scenarios. One was increasing the overall program funding by 50%, and the other was by 100%. And so what we're showing here is electric, natural gas, and then combined. The bar graph, the bar on the left is what the current policy potential is in this study. And then the middle bar is the 50% increase. And then on the right is the 100% increase. And then the dotted line is showing the optimized potential across what the cumulative 12-year potential is. I think one of the takeaways here is that the natural gas is more responsive to increases in funding than the electric. That's, I think, largely attributed to some of the constraints that are applied at the current policy level with funding. The current funding levels for fuels typically is around 80% electric, 20% gas, which is based on the sales and the funding levels that are coming into the focus program. So it does have a material impact on the natural gas side. And then finally, I'm just going to kind of leave you with a few takeaways that we kind of walk through. Residential lighting, the potential for that is diminishing. There's some short-term opportunity, but across the 12-year horizon, that diminishes quite a bit. The lower avoided costs have an impact on the cost effectiveness and what measures are able to pass. And we saw that measures that were at the margin in the last study are no longer cost effective. And that was largely a big impact on the natural gas side. There are not as many natural gas measures as electric, and a lot of them were marginally cost effective in 2017. And then natural gas is also a lot more sensitive to increases in funding as well. And I think what we also saw is that there is significant energy efficiency opportunity out there across the 12 years. It definitely, there's additional opportunities with increased funding too. So that was something else that we saw in that last scenario. So I'm going to hand it over to my co-presenter here, Amalia Hicks, and she's going to walk through a few slides around the rooftop solar potential.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to ask whether folks wanted to ask some questions about that first part, or if we should just kind of keep moving and then save the end for more questions for everything.
I'm okay moving ahead.
Yeah, I think we can move ahead.
Okay, great. And can you see my video too?
Yep.
I can't see myself somehow, but okay, that'll be great. So my name is Amalia Hicks. I'm also a principal at Cadmus. I am right here in Madison. And I helped to lead the rooftop solar PV potential study. So we just have a couple more slides to go over just the very high level results on that. Steve, you can move ahead, please. So we utilized a NREL program to determine technical and adoption potential for rooftop solar PV. It was called DGEN model. And they use satellite imagery to determine where there are rooftops that are oriented in the correct way and have a fairly detailed program that calculates total technical potential for rooftop solar PV. The results of that analysis showed that, as expected, the technical potential where we would be able to install rooftop solar PV is in the counties that have the most unobstructed rooftop square footage. So this map is showing where the majority of the technical potential lies in Wisconsin. Adding it all up, the potential is nearly 3 times larger than the current capacity in Wisconsin. That translates into 70% of the current statewide electric energy production. And that's because solar is not, the sun isn't up all the time in different seasons. The availability changes with different weather. And so that's how the capacity gets translated into production. Also, if we want to talk about consumption, because Wisconsin does import some energy, so the technical potential is about 65% of the total 2020 electric consumption.
We have a quick question here on your analysis for the rooftop solar. So then with the 70% number, to what extent does that take in any use of batteries, or are you leaving for a separate question to any upgrades to the distribution facilities, substations, et cetera, that are needed in order to get to that 70%? Or is that, what other considerations went into that, I guess, my question.
So this was a fairly tight timeline, and our scope was rather constrained on this. So it would actually be an additional kind of fairly effortful analysis to look into transmission and distribution and how that would connect with this. This is really simply, if you put solar panels on every rooftop in Wisconsin, what could be produced in it's an idealized scenario. It's not does not.
Yeah, I mean, so
some barriers or batteries.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just put them up and they don't produce. You have to have the right distribution. I see. I mean, there's a big caveat on the 70% then, because it's basically, you're not saying they're all connected to the grid, right? I mean, if you're not looking at it without understanding its interplay with the current system and what's needed for upgrades, then isn't that an overstatement?
I guess it depends on how you would want to characterize it. I guess I wouldn't necessarily call it an overstatement, but it is, an idealized scenario, and it is going to take a lot of effort on a lot of different fronts to, transition our distribution, transition the grid to being able, to be optimized for different types of energy generation, for sure. But that's definitely wildly beyond the scope of what we investigated here.
So it's a little bit like slide 6, right? Where it's looking at the theoretical technical maximum that can be achieved, right? It's not taking into account cost effectiveness, market barriers. Yeah, I mean, it's like, as this gets distributed to the public, it can be easily construed or misstated that this is what's reality, and this is not reality. I mean, we don't live in a technically feasible, that's not the world we live in. Like what's applicable to the world we live in is, I think, something that, and we'll take that into consideration when we talk about focus, but, the takeaway shouldn't be 70% of our electricity can be replaced by solar, because that's not reality.
Right. It could.
That leaves out a lot of other factors that need to go in. Right. That number may go way down based on, first of all, just personal behavior and people actually wanting to buy them and have them on their house and doing the upkeep. So, anyway, that's just my caveat for the release of the information.
Yeah, I think it's more of a situation where, if we did reconstruct and optimize the grid, this is what's possible in that situation, but that we're not there yet, but we could be someday as things evolve. But as you'll see, and I think we can move to the next slide, when we actually look at the simulated market adoption potential, that is where we start to add in, payback timescales and different market conditions and social pieces as well for these. The model uses agents that represent statistical groupings of the population and the available rooftops, and those through the model have the main driver of whether or not those agents will adopt solar rooftop is the payback timescale. So it's a financial incentive, really, whether or not it makes sense for them financially to adopt solar PV rooftop. So when you take that larger technical potential and you run it through that decision making and those financial pieces, the model predicts that by 2034, really only about 2% of that possible, 70% say of generation is actually likely to be adopted under the current market conditions, and some assumptions about how the technology cost changes over time. I don't know if that's at all helpful for kind of putting context around the results. Were there other kind of discussion around that right now, or would you like me to keep going?
Keep going. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, sorry. No, I didn't finish that whole slide. Sorry, Steve. Okay. And I know I'll try to go a little quickly, but there's a lot of information on the slide. I already talked about the 2%. Most of the market adoption potential is in the residential sector, followed by the commercial sector, and then income qualified is 23% of the residential. And the bar chart on the left there shows the individual IOUs and also the munis and co-ops kind of put together in the other category, and how we expect to see the market adoption increase over the next 13 years. And some of these IOUs and the other, we already have net metering policies in place, and we'll kind of get into what that is maybe on another, I think, on the next slide. So now I'm ready, Steve. Thank you. Okay, so in our simulations of market adoption, we looked at a couple of different scenarios. This plot shows the base, the red dotted line. And one of the scenarios we looked at is if Focus on Energy would increase their incentives. And that scenario resulted in a 6% increase in adoption by 2034. We also looked at if the federal investment tax credit was extended by another 3 years, how that would affect market adoption, and that also resulted in a 6% increase. The third scenario we looked at was more attractive financing with lower interest rates, less money down, and that resulted in 8% increase above the baseline in overall market adoption. And then the scenario that had the largest impact on adoption with a 34% increase was a net metering scenario. Within the DGen model, there is a flag to turn on or off net metering. And when you turn it on, the type of net metering that it reflects is actually the same type that MG&E has, which is that at the end of each month, if you create more energy than you use, that turns into credits that roll into the next month. So if I make 100 kilowatt hours and I use 80 of them, then 20 go into next month. And that continues on and is trued up at the end of the year. So kind of sets back to zero. But the way that increases adoption is that it financially benefits the customer because they end up being not having to pay in scenarios that don't include net metering. If you make more, you get paid back at the wholesale rate, which is a lot lower than what you pay to get that energy. So at the net metering rate, if you make more, you are effectively getting, reimbursed for the energy that you create at the same rate that you buy it at. So it ends up making the payback on the rooftop PV a shorter period of time.
Okay, I have a couple questions. The first is the baseline that's on here, is that inclusive of Focus on Energy rebates akin to the program that we have today, or is that an assumption of no state rebates at all?
I'm going to have to defer to Jeremy on that one. I think, Jeremy, does that include the Focus or not? Sorry.
Yeah, it includes the current focus incentives.
Okay. And then my second question is, when you say net metering, is one of the variables in that model related to what I'll call the cap as far as system size, like 20 kilowatts, 100 kilowatts, 300 kilowatts? You know, we have utilities with different levels of system size that are eligible. Was that adjusted in any way related to that blue line? So what was assumed for?
The model itself is designed such that it will only create or simulate an array that exactly meets the usage of 1 year's usage. So I don't know. I'll again have to defer to Jeremy on the commercial side, but I think that it's kind of baked into the model that there isn't a cap that makes a difference on the residential side, and I'm not sure if the cap makes it because of the fact that all the systems are sized to exactly meet the energy needs of that particular home.
Right.
So just to confirm, we did adjust the cap across the board. So the baseline included all the current utility caps, and then for the net metering scenario, we raised the cap to 500 kW for all of the market actors and all of the utilities.
Okay, thank you.
But Jeremy, can you also confirm that on the residential side, that cap probably didn't have a lot of implications for the results?
Yeah, there are not going to be any residential systems that come even remotely close to the 500 kW cap.
I guess more of a comment than a question too, back on the net metering. But I mean, every one of the scenarios you guys tested here it was predictable, right? I mean, every one of these is helping the individual who adopts the scenario pay for it. So it's a cost shift. So it's not really a shock that the more someone else is helping pay for it, that there's going to be increased adoption. That's more of a comment. But on the net metering, so I just want to be clear on because we have it. So the one you modeled, though, is a cap of 500 wholesale rate and no limit on a carryover for the netting?
It's not wholesale rate. It's a credit.
Retail.
Basically.
I'm sorry, retail rate.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. But there is a cap to the extent that after 12 months,
yearly cap.
If the system had produced more in a 12-month period than was used, it would reset to zero at that point.
Yeah.
And some of the utilities already have net metering policies. So this net metering scenario was to take the utilities that it was also increase the caps, but take the utilities that were not currently offering net metering and add that. Other questions on this slide?
Nope.
All righty. Thank you. As a piece of this research, we also looked into income qualified barriers to adoption, and we spoke with stakeholders in various types of stakeholders, folks that are running programs in other states that have been successful, and talked to them about some of the barriers that they have found and how potential solutions or ways to ameliorate some of those barriers that they've seen success in. So I think it was in a previous slide that income qualified homes represent 23% of the 2034 market adoption potential. But there are a number of barriers that income qualified homeowners face. One of them, of course, is a cost burden that is more difficult for those participants to bear. And some of the solutions that we found through interviews and literature research is that you can replace loans with grants or incentives, apply flexible types of incentives where low-income customers receive more help, and also third-party ownership is a possible solution. However, in Wisconsin, that is currently not legal. And then for the second major barrier is home readiness, that some of the lower income homes have roofs that don't easily lend themselves to mounting solar panels, et cetera. So there, some of the potential solutions are to offer grants or incentives for repairs or administrative support, so that as they're coming into the PV program, there is also some funding to help with repairs to get the home ready to support the PV, and that can also be done through leveraging existing energy efficiency programs, such as like home performance, or some of the programs that we already have here in Wisconsin. And then the third major barrier is on the multifamily side. So in that case, it can help to also have incentives for property owners, not just residents, or standardizing net metering. And finally, virtual net metering is effectively like community solar, so that you wouldn't necessarily have to, you could have the residents kind of buy into a shared solar array, and then the energy could be split to the different residents. We're on to the summaries. Okay, so the technical potential, as we talked about, could be in the world with a new grid or updated grid, a sizable energy resource, but less than 2% of that technical potential is projected to be adopted by the market by 2034. Income qualified households represent 23% of the adoption potential, but there are a number of barriers that those customers face to adoption. We have benchmarked some successful programs that have offered solutions to some of those barriers. And we didn't have a slide specifically on this, but it's in the report that we looked into the cost effectiveness of rooftop solar PV systems, and it's close to 1 on the residential side right now, and a little bit over 1 on the commercial side. And we compared those using the official Wisconsin cost effectiveness test, the modified TRC. We compared those to some other electric high cost energy efficiency measures, and like heat pumps, for example, and the cost effectiveness is comparable to those. And then finally, the scenario that we looked at that had the largest effect on rooftop solar PV adoption is net metering. It had the largest effect on adoption. I think that is our last slide. If there are more questions.
Good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, thanks for allowing us to meet virtually and present these results to you. I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you,
Thank you.
Monica.
Thanks.
Thank you.